Okay, let's kick off this deep dive. We've pulled together a whole sack of sources here, articles, reports, news updates, all really centered around key developments in cybersecurity from early June 2025.
Yeah, it's quite a snapshot of a very busy period. It touches on pretty much everything from government policy changes and privacy issues right through to, evolving threats and some specific incidents making headlines.
Exactly. So our mission today really is to guide you through this information stack. We want to cut through some of the noise, pull out the most important nuggets, maybe the surprising facts, and help you understand the implications.
hmm
What do all these different pieces tell us about what's really going on for governments, for businesses, and honestly, for you personally?
Right, let's start with what feels like a pretty significant shift, changes in government cybersecurity posture. And kind of top of the list is this proposed budget for the Department of Homeland Security, specifically the part impacting CISA. Yes, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. This proposed budget is, well, stark is maybe the word that comes to mind. It's really crucial to remember this is just a proposal, right? It still needs congressional approval.
Exacto.
But the details in it are quite revealing.
Revealing indeed. I mean, we're seeing a proposal to eliminate over a third of CISA's staff. There are rumors floating around 40%, so this is, pretty close. And a proposed 17% overall spending cut for the agency.
Yeah.
What does losing that many people actually mean for an agency focused on defending critical infrastructure?
Well, that's exactly the critical insight here, isn't it? It's not just some number on a spreadsheet. These proposed cuts seem to target core functions. We're talking cyber operations, infrastructure security, even things like chemical inspections, public communications.
So it directly impacts their ability to monitor threats,
Yeah.
share intelligence, respond to incidents across the country.
That's the concern, yes. It really impacts CISA's capacity to do its job effectively.
And what about specific programs? This proposal seems to gut or even entirely eliminate some key initiatives.
It does. Cyber defense education and training looks like it's gone under this proposal. Funding for the National Infrastructure Simulation and Analysis Center, the place that helps model potential cyber impacts, basically wiped out.
Wow. And looking at the numbers, it gets even more specific, right? Like election security funding.
Cut by $40 million, according to the proposal. Risk management funding, which was, I think, $134 million, it's proposed to plummet to just $36 million. That's a huge disinvestment in proactive risk reduction.
Huge. And then there's this detail about infrastructure security funding that feels like, I don't know, a bit of a shell game. On paper, it looks like it more than doubles from $159 million to over $300 million.
Right, but the source points out that's because $237.8 million was simply moved out of the Weapons of Mass Destruction program budget and just reclassified under infrastructure security. So the net effect, when you actually look at the existing infosec funding, is a $90 million decrease. It's a cut presented to look like an increase.
Wow. Okay. So areas like bombing prevention funding, that effectively disappears from over $30 million down to under $2 million.
Pretty much. And chemical security funding is also drastically cut in the proposal.
So the potential consequence, as the source notes it, it's pretty profound then. If this budget actually passes, the responsibility for cybersecurity could heavily shift back onto states and commercial organizations.
This seems to be the idea floated, yeah. Similar to what's been discussed for FEMA in other contexts.
And the insight there is that many states likely just won't have the budget to pick up that slack, right?
Right.
And asking commercial businesses to suddenly ramp up defenses significantly might be unrealistic for a lot of them.
Exactly. And while that shift is happening, or potentially happening domestically, countries like Russia, China, North Korea, they're reportedly quite pleased with this prospect. They see a potentially weakened U.S. cyber defense agency.
That context makes the reports about CISA leadership departures even more concerning, doesn't it? We're hearing 4 out of 6 division chiefs, HR leads, others are leaving, all amidst these proposed cuts and looming layoffs. CISA's public message is, everything's fine, but the reporter's skepticism in the source feels pretty warranted given these numbers and departures.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly challenging to maintain morale and, crucially, retain experienced talent when you're faced with that level of uncertainty and proposed reductions. It creates a real leadership vacuum during, frankly, a critical time.
Keeping your systems safe is super important as businesses rely more and more on digital systems, and that's where turnkey cybersecurity can really help.
Yeah, we're here to help small businesses just like yours make sure they're safe and sound in this crazy world of cybersecurity. And we offer a whole suite of services specifically tailored for you. So that's ensuring CMMC compliance and doing penetration testing. We also run vulnerability scans, and we can help you develop a comprehensive risk assessment.
And it doesn't stop there, right?
No, it doesn't.
We handle incident response, should the unfortunate happen, and we guide you through migrations like GCC. We just want to make sure your transitions are smooth and that you're secure.
It's all about peace of mind, right? You focus on what you do best, running your business, and we'll make sure that your digital world is safe and sound.
Okay, shifting gears a bit within government actions.
Yeah.
We also saw the Commerce Secretary defending export controls on sensitive tech, like advanced AI chips. The argument presented is basically that restricting access for countries like China helps maintain America's edge.
Right, that's one side of the argument presented in the source.
Yep.
But it also raises a counterpoint, offering a different perspective. It notes that past attempts at similar controls haven't always, shall we say, worked out as intended.
How so? What's the insight there?
Well, the source suggests that China is now producing comparable chips domestically and perhaps more importantly, selling them at lower prices than U.S. companies can.
Which means U.S. companies are losing significant business, losing market share, because they're effectively blocked from selling to a massive market, while competitors just emerge anyway.
Yeah, it creates a really complex trade-off between those national security goals and the economic impact.
Okay, here's where things get particularly eye-opening, and I think for many, quite concerning. Reports on government data collection on U.S. citizens.
Yes, this section of the sources is pretty striking. There's a report that the White House contracted with Palantir, the goal, to create a single centralized database of U.S. citizens' personal information.
And the reactions highlighted in the source are varied and, well, strong, aren't they? You see concern from conservatives, people already wary of government power, but also feelings of betrayal from some who might typically support the administration. One far-right supporter is even quoted calling it the ultimate betrayal. The source frames this development pretty starkly, suggesting it could signal a new surveillance state.
And this isn't just, theoretical. Adding to this is another report about the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, apparently setting up a platform specifically to buy commercial data.
Right. And the stated justification reported in the source, it's, quote, hard to get a writ from a judge, meaning a warrant.
Exactly.
So the workaround is just buy the data that companies like Facebook and Google collect anyway.
That seems to be the approach. And the insight here is pretty significant. This commercial data often contains exactly the kind of personal information the government might want. Buying it allows intelligence agencies to potentially bypass the traditional legal requirements, the judicial oversight that comes with getting warrants.
It's a pathway to potentially access vast amounts of data without those legal hurdles.
Precisely.
And speaking of nation-states, there was recent testimony confirming suspicions about foreign adversaries being, well, deeply embedded in U.S. networks.
Yeah, retired General McMaster and also the CISO from Palo Alto Networks both testified. They confirmed that China specifically is buried deep inside U.S. networks, and importantly, doing so very quietly.
And the speculation is that this persistent access isn't just about spying, right? It's about positioning. It could allow China to potentially disable significant parts of U.S. critical infrastructure if there were ever a conflict.
That's the thinking. It's about having those access points ready, lying dormant, prepared to be activated if needed.
There's also this kind of wild anecdote about Russia. Apparently, as they were modernizing their nuclear weapons sites, we're talking silos, barracks, control centers, tunnels, they posted hundreds of blueprints on an unsecured website as part of the bid process.
Yes, a truly stunning operational security failure. It effectively gave adversaries detailed maps of highly sensitive nuclear infrastructure just because someone didn't properly secure procurement documents. It's almost unbelievable, really, given the stakes involved.
Okay, finally, in this section on government and nation-state stuff, we have the accelerating timeline for quantum computing's impact on cybersecurity.
Yeah, this threat seems to be getting closer faster than we thought. It's now believed that breaking traditional encryption, the kind we use every day, using future quantum computers, could be about 20 times easier than previous estimates suggested.
20 times easier.
Wow.
Which has pushed up the estimated timeline for Q-Day. That's the point when quantum computers can reliably break current encryption. It's roughly 5 years away.
5 years. which is a very, very short time horizon in the context of upgrading global encryption standards. And the worrying detail here is that both China and the US are reportedly already collecting vast amounts of currently encrypted data right now.
With the hope or expectation of being able to decrypt it later once they have those advanced quantum capabilities.
Exactly. And while, sure, some data will become irrelevant over time, it ages poorly. Some highly sensitive information, think state secrets or personally identifiable information, that stuff doesn't really age poorly. It could still be compromised years down the line.
Okay, let's pivot now to the ongoing privacy battle. Specifically, let's focus on some reported techniques used by, well, major tech companies.
Right. This section of the source material highlights how companies like Meta, Facebook's parent company, and Yandex found ways to essentially circumvent user privacy settings, particularly on Android devices.
So the core issue here is that users made explicit choices.
Right.
They basically said, don't track me, or limited data sharing. And these companies reportedly found technical workarounds anyway.
That's what's alleged. How did they do it? Well, instead of relying on traditional methods like website cookies, which users can often block, they reportedly sent detailed user data locally on the phone, directly to their own flagship apps like the Facebook app or the Yandex app already installed on the device.
Oh.
Then those apps would consolidate the data and send it back home to Meta or Yandex servers.
So they effectively bypassed the standard web consent mechanisms by routing the data through their own installed apps. That's clever, in a way. And the scale of this reported activity is just massive, right?
Yeah.
Roughly 6 million websites use Meta pixels, 3 million use Yandex pixels, potentially collecting data this way.
Yes, the potential scale is enormous, and the data harvested is incredibly detailed. It goes beyond just simple browsing habits. It captures specifics like shopping behavior, items added to a cart, whether a purchase was actually completed. It paints a very, very granular picture of user activity.
And Meta's response, as noted in the source, was that they stopped this activity upon becoming aware of the concerns.
Which, as the source points out, often translates to, we stopped when we got caught. Google reportedly shipped some countermeasures in a recent Chrome update, framing it almost like a trial run to see if Meta and Yandex get the message and stop the behavior.
Right. And the insight here, which is important, is that while this report focused on Android and web browsing, the source suggests similar techniques probably work on iOS devices, smart TVs, desktops.
Yeah, the fundamental vulnerability or technique isn't likely limited to just one platform.
And now that this technique is public, there's significant potential for legal consequences.
Yeah.
This activity likely violates various state privacy laws that require explicit user consent for this kind of data collection.
Absolutely. The potential financial impact could be huge. The source highlights this. $1 billion fine in one state, $1 billion fine in another. After a while, it adds up. The financial risk for companies engaging in these kinds of workarounds is becoming substantial.
It definitely adds up. Meta reportedly claimed this was all just a potential miscommunication with Google about Android policy.
Yes, but the source seems quite dismissive of that explanation, suggesting it looked much more like a deliberate technical bypass.
And we can kind of connect this technical workaround stuff to the broader global conversation about eroding online anonymity. For instance, China's move to tie a national ID to an online user ID.
That's right. Now, currently, that's voluntary in China, but the source raises the really important point that it may not stay voluntary. And the deeper concern, really, is that other countries might look at that model and think about replicating it.
And if national IDs become fundamentally tied to online identities across the board, well, the whole concept of internet anonymity, which has been pretty foundational for a lot of online activities and freedoms.
It could effectively become toast, as the source puts it.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Let's dive into the practical risks and the evolving threats that organizations, and frankly individuals too, need to be aware of right now. And maybe surprisingly, some of the most critical advice is still coming from CISA.
Yeah, despite those budget concerns we talked about earlier, CISA is still out there pushing fundamental guidance. And it really starts with asking businesses a deceptively simple but absolutely critical question. Does this have to be open to the internet?
Right. Which requires businesses to truly understand their digital footprint, doesn't it? Identifying all their assets, including those often overlooked industrial IoT devices, alongside the traditional IT systems.
Exactly. And CISA provides some helpful yardsticks for businesses to measure against when asking that question. Like, is internet access truly necessary for the core function? Is there a clear business justification? Are there strong security measures in place, things like VPNs or multi-factor authentication, MFA, to restrict access? And crucially, is the device regularly maintained and patched?
Yeah, the basics, and their long-standing advice is reinforced. If a device or system doesn't absolutely need public internet exposure, shut it down. Or at least restrict access drastically. Just putting a password on it is definitely not sufficient protection anymore.
Not even close. They also reiterate other fundamental tips, changing default passwords, having rigorous patch management, deploying MFA wherever you possibly can, and investing in regular employee training.
Still the foundations.
These aren't glamorous, maybe, but they are consistently cited as the foundational defenses that, frankly, many organizations still seem to miss.
We're also seeing reports on how cyber attacks themselves are morphing, kind of moving beyond traditional ransomware.
Yeah, the old days, and by that we mean maybe just last year, of simply encrypting data and demanding a ransom.
Right.
Well, that could often be mitigated if you had good backups.
Right.
So attackers have adapted, partly because backups became more common and more effective.
So what's the new vector, or the increasingly common one?
Insider threats are really emerging as a big problem. And it's important here to distinguish between, intentional, malicious insiders and the unintentional, accidental ones.
Okay. And the source highlights the accidental category as being...
A way bigger problem.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because it requires very little technical sophistication to exploit. The international hacking group, known as Scattered Spider, is cited as being particularly effective at leveraging this accidental insider threat vector. They used it in that recent attack on the UK retailer Marks & Spencer, for example.
So they don't need to hack firewalls if they can just trick an employee.
Exactly. They just need to trick an employee into making a mistake, or clicking something they shouldn't, or granting some basic level of access.
That's a crucial insight. The simplest attack vector, just exploiting human error, is becoming maybe the most potent one. We also saw details on several specific attack vectors and news items hitting both individuals and businesses recently.
Yeah, quite a few. Fake emails claiming to be from the Social Security Administration, the SSA, are apparently tricking users. They tell you your statement is ready, prompt you to click a link or open an attachment.
And that installs what?
A remote access Trojan, or a RAT.
Which basically gives the attacker remote control over your computer.
Yep. Allowing for theft, more malware installation, pretty much anything they want to do on that machine.
Okay, what else?
Voice phishing, or vishing, is also targeting specific companies, notably Salesforce customers. There's a financially motivated group reportedly calling employees, specifically in English-speaking international branches of multinationals, trying to trick them into granting sensitive access or sharing credentials over the phone.
And once they get that initial foothold, they move laterally, right?
Yeah.
To other linked cloud systems, Microsoft, Okta, Workplace.
Exactly. It really highlights how interconnected all these cloud services are. A compromise in one can quickly spread. Software as a service or SaaS providers, they're also under direct attack themselves now. Hackers are specifically breaching these providers to steal their customers' credentials. Commvault was cited as an example where customer data was compromised through a breach at the provider.
Oof. Exploiting software flaws is still a constant threat too, right? There was that Apple WebKit 0-day patch this month.
Yeah, and reportedly it was being exploited all the way back since 2020. A more recent campaign using malicious ads that could actually escape Apple's sandbox security started last summer. It just underlines the absolute necessity of applying those patches as soon as they're available.
Absolutely. And compromised devices are still out there floating around. Thousands of ASUS routers were found with a persistent backdoor.
That's right. The recommended fixes included manual disinfection, applying the patch, or probably the simplest for most people, just doing a factory reset and then patching immediately.
And there were several specific breach examples and consequences highlighted in the sources too, showing the real-world impact.
Definitely. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Center, for instance, agreed to a $52 million settlement for lawsuits that stemmed from a 2023 breach.
Wow, $52 million.
Yeah, and the interesting detail there is that roughly half of that money, about $26 million, is allocated specifically for credit monitoring and identity theft insurance for the affected patients.
That's significant. We also saw examples of real operational disruption. Victoria's Secret investigating a security incident that briefly took their website down.
And hospitals in Maine and New Hampshire, run by the Catholic healthcare organization Covenant, had to limit services because a cyber attack forced them to shut down system access entirely for a time.
That's serious impact. And the scale keeps growing, right? that ransomware attack in Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Yeah, that resulted in warnings being sent to about 70,000 people.
Yeah.
And the noteworthy part there, that's actually more than the city's total population of around 50,000 residents. It just shows the potential reach of these data breaches beyond just immediate residents.
And insider threats aren't just a private sector issue either. There was that anecdote about a former employee in the Defense Intelligence Agency's, the DIA's own insider threat program.
Oh, yeah, ironic, right. Caught trying to sell sensitive data to an FBI agent who was posing as a representative from a friendly foreign country.
Wow. It really proves that just understanding a program doesn't guarantee compliance.
And maybe two quick final points from the sources here. Researchers looking at code generated by AI models found a kind of surprising issue.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
Well, these AI models were creating code that referenced non-existent third-party software libraries. And at a massive scale, something like 440,000 out of 576,000 samples they looked at had this problem.
Huh. What's the risk there?
Well, the risk is that hackers could see these widely referenced but currently non-existent library names and then go create malicious libraries using those exact names.
So a developer might then unknowingly download and include this malicious code in their software, thinking it's legitimate.
Exactly, creating a whole new potential supply chain vulnerability, kind of seeded by the AI itself.
Interesting. And for anyone involved with CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, there was a note about personal devices.
Yes, just a reminder that under CMMC rules, even personally owned devices like your phone or your home computer, if they're used for work, can fall within the CMMC boundary.
And the insight there is that using personal devices adds significant complexity and cost, right? They need to be fully managed by the organization, not the employee.
Which employees might understandably push back against. And while workarounds exist, they require substantial technical effort and financial investment. Not always straightforward.
Okay, let's wrap up this section with a really practical anecdote that kind of underscores some of the points we've been discussing. The general manager of a small utility district, I think it was in Massachusetts, received a phone call from someone claiming to be from the FBI.
Right, and the caller told him his utility had been hacked and then asked him to click a link that would be sent in an email.
Red flags immediately, right?
You'd hope so. And thankfully, the GM had the good sense to be skeptical of an unsolicited contact like that.
Smart move. So he hung up the phone, which is definitely the right first step. And then he called the real FBI field office in Boston directly to verify the call.
And it turned out they had actually been hacked. The call, surprisingly, was legitimate, even if the delivery method was, let's say, a little unusual.
Wow. So it ruined his Thanksgiving, apparently.
Yeah.
But he confirmed the threat was real.
Yeah. And the FBI's advice coming out of this incident is really valuable for everyone. If you get an unsolicited contact from someone claiming to be law enforcement, or any authority really, and you aren't sure if it's real, feel free to just contact your local FBI field office or the relevant agency directly through official channels. They can help you verify if it's legitimate before you click anything or give out info.
So we've really spanned the spectrum in this deep dive, haven't we? From those proposed high-level government policy shifts and nation-state actions, through the ongoing tug-of-war over privacy and user tracking, right down to the evolving practical threats hitting businesses and individuals today, often through really simple but effective vectors like insider error.
It's definitely a complex and very fast-moving landscape. Staying informed about these kinds of shifts and the new attack methods is absolutely essential for navigating it safely.
Absolutely. So as we close out this exploration of the sources, here's maybe a thought for you, the listener, to mull over based on everything we've discussed today. Given this reported push towards more government data collection, maybe alongside potential cuts to government cybersecurity support, and then you have the rise of these simple but effective attacks like accidental insider threats and basic phishing, where do you think the primary responsibility for cybersecurity should ultimately lie moving forward? Is it mainly with the government, is it with organizations, or is it increasingly falling onto us as individuals? And maybe more importantly, what does that mean for how you protect yourself or your organization in this kind of environment?
Yeah, definitely something to consider as you process all this information.